I guess I should begin by just saying that welcome to my therapy session. My therapy session. And homage to education.
Yeah. Okay.
Here, here.
This might take about 22 minutes, so might be boring you. I don't know. If you want to get up and get yourself some more refreshments, go ahead. But please do it quietly. I'm just going to spend a few minutes mainly paying homage to my educators and the people who have enabled me in becoming an education, and then also make a few remarks about pedagogy, my pedagogy, and how I've worked, and what I hope my legacy is on that. So the first person I'd like to pay respects to, send blessings to, for educating me is my mom, who tutored me after I basically skipped second grade strolling the Croisette along the French Riviera in Cannes, where we lived almost a year while my dad skippered a ship in the Mediterranean fleet. Talk about a free-range childhood. The French nuns, who did not care if I escaped their reading lessons, letter drills, so I could learn French where people sell ice cream, clean fish, play games, make love, du langue rather than parole, the disembodied rote of The fifth grade teacher in Hawaii who made us present a poem every Wednesday. Weekly, I chose Don Blanding, an advertising exec who wrote about coconut palms and trade winds and catamarans on the waves. I wrote my first poem for that class. My teacher said to stop reading Don Blanding. My seventh grade civics teacher at a different high school in Hawaii was a negative model. He made a very awkward young boy, a classmate of mine, stand before the class while he laughed at and reviled him for 20 minutes for thinking a pathetic specimen like himself belonged in the Boy Scouts. I have leapt to his defense, but only in recurrent nightmares, too terrified to aid him at the time. My 10th grade teacher at a segregated school near Memphis, Tennessee, she read Huckleberry Finn to us, from the racist culture of Huck's, Missouri, to the Phelps Farm, where Huck, the age of a 7th grader, risks life and soul to help his male mother, Jim, escape slavery. Bob Boquist, my 12th grade English teacher at a Department of Defense school in Argentia, Newfoundland. He was a Korean War vet whose fiancée died, and this was his foreign legion, I suppose. He had us read Joseph Conrad's Nostromo, sat in the back of the class murmuring cuss words, and invited us to his quarters for a few beers. He gave me Dylan Thomas's collected poems for graduation. Always be the poet, Bob wrote on the title page, for the poet is everybody. So in 1962, I first gazed on our basilica of American elm trees arcing over the University of Delaware green. First planted in 1917, only a few original trees that once whispered round the temples remain. Dr. Edward Rosenberry taught freshman honors lit. I talked my way into his class and got an F in my first paper. He told us that no one who got an F should think it was a disaster. But he wrote on my paper, "This is a catastrophe." When I finally got an A, he chased me down in the library where I worked, right here in Memorial Hall at the time, to congratulate me. In a class full of private school girls, we studied the Dubliners, and I've loved disturbing literature ever since. Poet in residence Robert Huff held court at his home to feed us beer and regale us with stentorian imitations of Dylan Thomas. In his class of modern poetry, I made several lifelong friends. I still remember discussing the pun in Robertson Jeffers' Boats in a Fog, the throb of their engines, subdued by the fog, patient and cautious, coasting all round the peninsula back to the boys in Monterey Harbor. He invited the proudly gay Edward Field to read to our regular departmental Wednesday confab. He told our class that Field might read some of his dirty poems if he wasn't afraid of the administration. He was not, and he did, in spades. Something about being buggered by an octopus. The American Penwomen's Association populated the front rows, their crimson necks hackling in shock. During my truncated career as a 60s undergrad, I witnessed Carl Shapiro reciting The Fly, oh, hideous little bat the size of snot with polyhedral eye and shabby clothes, to populate the stinking cat you walk the promontory of the dead man's nose. I argued with Randall Jarrell that Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood was a masterpiece from end to end. And I saw Robert Lowell read for the Union Dead. He was transcendent. Check the YouTube video. You'll see. It's an audio, actually. He had come to judge the 1963 Academy of American Poets Prize, which I won. Several of the poets on the second floor of this building memorial, including Rosenberry, were my teachers. Romantic literature with Merton Christensen, advanced comp with Ropes and Bailey, who introduced us to elements of style. His son Jack and I were pals. Then there was Frank Newman, a dear man, whose classes spanned the interregnum between my dropping out of college in '65, when I failed to complete his Shakespeare, and my part-time return the spring of 1986. He introduced me to my favorite Shakespeare, Coriolanus, and taught me prosody, breaking down what we used to call the masculine and feminine figures in poetry. My 1965 prosody paper earned a B-. In 1986, I got an A. I had been an autoworker for almost 20 years by that time, and damn, I can do this. Long story short, I had wandered into Chrysler in August of '69 to support my family, and there I languished, taking a few extension econ classes in the '70s. I had watched the discourse ditch Keynesianism for the Chicago School, and then returned to my true love, English. Still an extension student in 1986, I needed biblical and classical lit, and there was John Dean holding a knife over a photo of his son to illustrate Abraham's test. When I taught IB English in Ecuador, I cribbed from John's course wholesale. But I would bend a live student over my desk, praying God would stay my blade. It made a far stronger impression, I'm sure, and was a lot more fun. I continued to nibble away at that yearned-for degree with three very distinguished writers and scholars. Akasha Gloria Hull's Black American Literature, the late Tony Cade Bambara's prose writing workshop, and a poetry writing workshop with a poet we'd studied in Bob Huff's modern poetry, the late, great W.D. Snodgrass. Then one day, among the clangs and smoke of Chrysler, I was on break, reading a textbook, when my shop steward came by to tell me that the plant was to shut down for 9 months for major refitting, almost exactly coinciding with the 2 semesters I'd need to graduate. And they would pay us. To let you know how I felt about this, let me share with you an excerpt from my auto plan, if I remember it all, which I finished writing about a year after I got my master's. Sometime soon after I began working for Chrysler, I began to have this recurrent dream. Putting it together from all its variations, it goes something like this. It was on a kind of a huge gymnasium, a gymnasium in the classical as well as modern sense, the whole school, not just PE. A sound mind and a sound body. Anyway, not only was there this vast, well-seasoned hardwood floor and high-vaulted ceiling dark above the hanging floodlights, but you could feel the earth humming beneath your feet. You could hear in the thunder of the basketballs and sneakers in the reaches of the room a resonance in your own gut, like when you dribble the ball and you can feel its center, even when it's in halfway from the floor to your hand, so you know as you veer through those guarding the basket inside the key just where the ball means to be, and you unite with its path and pace to lay it up over the rim and in. Like Magic Johnson, right? When a world of productive capabilities and instincts are that alive, to quote Karl Marx. Anyways, somehow I wandered wandered from this floor to what I thought was another part of the gymnasium, but it was a different place, and it was a different kind of place. There were greasy chains dragging along tracks on the floor, and there were giant plates of steel rumbling along like juggernauts, and there were streaks of fire and darkness and green machines and men with lost looks in their eyes, and seeing these things, I began to forget how to get back to the gymnasium, and I even forgot the gymnasium. So I just fell in line, on the line. Like, what else was I to do? And then I saw an infant in baby bunting crawling on tender knees across the tracks. Do you remember Sweet Pea in the Popeye cartoons? Miss Oil would leave the baby Sweet Pea in the care of Popeye, who would inevitably become distracted and soon discover Sweet Pea scooting along some steel beam hoisted high aloft at some high-rise construction site, or blithely crawling on all fours across some high-speed intersection, or bobbing over alligator backs amid snapping jaws at the zoo. "Oh my gosh," Popeye exclaimed, rushing to the rescue and eventually availing himself of the elixir of spinach to save Sweet Pea, and in the process rendering some service to the starving children of Europe. Anyway, there I was, an exile from the gymnasium, humping the line along with all the other lost souls, and watching this inner child, and this child's dress. This infant's baby bunting began to snag in the gears of the chain drive and pull him in closer and closer to those ugly cogs and links, those gnashing molars of steel, and then I'd awaken with the image yet vivid in my imagination and continuing in now an inaccessible dream time, with the chubby and bloody little legs were gnawed and snapped like chicken bones. And in my mind's ear, William Blake whispers, "Sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse unacted desires." Now, across the street from Chrysler's assembly plant in Newark, where I worked, was an athletic complex for the University of Delaware, and I went to school there for 2 years before Chrysler. So there you have, if you want it, the key to the literal locations in the dream, but I don't think that baby was Sweet Pea. Myths and dreams of dismemberment go back, at least in written record, at least as far as Egypt, where Osiris was either castrated or dismembered and by the evil Set and thrown into the Nile and then reassembled by the lovely Isis. Don't forget our own crucifixion. So, how was I to reassemble myself like Osiris, resurrect myself like Christ, redeem myself like a poor sinner, rescue my inner child like Popeye? What was to be my Isis, my Holy Ghost, my grace of God, my elixir, my can of spinach? End scene. Now, my dreams of Chrysler today are far different. A chain of brothers and sisters in a rhythm, like a dance of the quick and the dead. I was now a full-time student and racing for the finish. Thanks to George Miller, I learned the basics of how to teach writing in the rhetorical modes, which I apply especially in E110 sections for foreign students at EUD. I remember how George urged us to always say something positive on every paper we mark. If only, nice font. Richard Davidson deepened my appreciation for Hemingway, as well as my ability to adapt some of Papa's tools. I was privileged to have Delaware Poet Laureate Emerita Fleda Brown and Joan Del Fattore as my advisors at various stages. When I was a teaching grad student, instructional grad student, I had, where's my comrade there? There she is. Right? Ms. Hallio. And thank you so much. Marcia. Well, I'll talk about that later. Louis Arena's class in teaching English as a second language gave me the foundation I needed to teach English in American schools in Ecuador and Lebanon. Finally, in grad school, I took 3 courses with Mark Amsler, who pretty much sums up the flavor of that era's radical post-structuralist bead games. It was an intellectual feast of linguistics, semiotics, and philosophy, for which I'm not sure I gained more than a barely adequate méconnaissance. In a similar spirit, I took a course with Michael Kotzel called Mapping the Territory, a title he put under erasure the first day. In recent years, Michael and I collaborated to bring working-class poet Jim Daniels to the UD. I discovered Daniels in the early 80s, and his poems about autoworkers rang true to me. He wrote the blurb for my auto plan. It's back there on the table. One of the most important teachers in my life is my wife, Dr. Joan French, a specialist in early education, special education, and educational leadership. Believe me, no matter what level of teaching you pursue, there is no greater advisor than someone who knows their way around an elementary school classroom. She and her colleagues, several of whom are here today, were pioneers. They were from the Delaware Autism Program. They were pioneers in one of the greatest Delaware autism programs in the country. It became a model nationwide. Amen. I value all my teachers, including the ones who have slipped my increasingly slippery mind, so sorry for those that left out. So, there's some other people who've been helpful to me, who taught me and helped me. My bosses, mentors, and enablers. First, there was Dr. Art Charles. He was the secondary principal at Academia Cotopaxi in Quito, and he promoted a barely experienced me to be English chair. Later, he wanted Dr. Joan in Beirut, so I got the spousal hire, this time as an experienced English chair at International College of Lebanon. Overseas teaching fosters camaraderie, and he and his wife Sandy are now best friends with Dr. Joan and me. The late Dr. Charlie Robinson was a great advocate for adjuncts and instructional grad students. He was top kick in the grad program when I was there. After my UAW tuition assistance expired, I woke up one morning to hear a radio horoscope say it was a good day for an Aries to ask for money. I went to Charlie to ask for some. Peering through towers of files and books, he said, probably. Stephen Leach has been my literary mentor, editor, publisher, colleague, and comrade for half a century. As well as an experimental novelist and poet, he is a disc jockey and an historian of Delaware literature, jazz, popular music, and art. He has been the executive editor at Dream Streets magazine for about 4 decades, and I call him Delaware's foremost person of letters. Steve Bernhardt was the chair at the UD English department when I began as a regular adjunct after leaving Lebanon in 2005. He took note of an article I wrote for the Alumni magazine and encouraged me to develop my honors course on the 60s, as well as my study abroad program in Ecuador. John Ernest, as a new English chair, took a chance on encouraging me to develop my experiential service course on the poetry of empowerment when I first pitched it to him at a Christmas party in 2013. He was constantly supportive in funding and logistics for projects related to this course. Now, you all know that what John chooses, Kaylee only disposes. And she was often the main one to take on extra duties to administer my schemes. And thank you to her. Please convey that to her, that I mentioned her here. She wasn't the only administrator that helped me, but she was like, wow. Susan Sarah was an associate director of community engagement, still is, guided me, funded me, and supported me for several years as I developed and implemented my Poetry of Empowerment course. Her patience is boundless, and her support was priceless. Let me talk just a few minutes in summation about my pedagogy. First, Paulo Freire. He urges students to solve problems collaboratively and to ground these problems in the practical vicissitudes of life, including, if not especially, issues of power and class. Here I can thank Dean George Watson. There you go. George Watson. For leading a program where I learned problem-based learning, a means of implementing Freire's idea, but there's more to it than that. But at any rate, Accordingly, ever since I first applied it in my E110 honors class on the 60s, I have all my E110 students adopt the roles of various stakeholders in the 1961 Freedom Riders, from local police to the liberal newspaper editor to the Klansman to Attorney General Bobby Kennedy to William Faulkner's fictional and ambivalent Gavin Stevens to the diverse readers themselves, some religious, some radical, some young, some old. From these perspectives, they must solve the problem of what the freedom rider should do, faced with violent opposition and pressure from powerful elites to pull back. Similarly, my Poetry of Empowerment class worked with individuals and groups in Wilmington who used poetry for social justice, healing, and empowerment. The problem that my students had to address, and that the university still needs to address, is how to transfer capital value beyond campus borders, value that augments the ability of the community to grow itself, economically and culturally. You know, the rule of thumb is that capital equipment lasts at least a year, a little longer than a semester. Second, human rights. Today is Human Rights Day, the 71st anniversary of the day the United Nations General Assembly declared the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To the end, I'm quoting, that every individual and every organ of society shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms. America ratified this declaration, and every American school is an organ of the society, so I take that as a license to teach a unit on human rights. Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. I use the Declaration as a basis for an argumentative research paper. Now, since, according to Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, students can reject it if they like. And select some other generalized system of values. The Bible, natural law, Declaration of Cairo, the NRA's Guide to the Constitution, whatever they like. But I teach the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So can you. Third, the pastoral counseling model. I studied this under the nun professor who came to Ecuador to teach Dr. Joan and me a graduate class in curriculum development. Also based on Paulo Freire, this model emphasizes how everything that goes on in a school environment, how the teachers are treated, whether they have a union representation, how the custodians are respected, how the parents and community are involved, whether the windows are energy efficient, or if the elms are dying, all are aspects of the curriculum, not just some formalized accreditation checklist. And finally, love. Love of all kinds. But it includes the human family, the Holy Family, and the great web of life. Every child is a window on creation. They share with you, or at least they let you peek in on their universe for a few weeks or years, and then they are gone. But not without leaving a treasure with you. Martin Buber spoke of the I-thou relationship, an experience of another being in the fullness of their shared subjectivity, not as an instrument of your ego or your agenda, your judgment, or your need to maintain academic standards. It is an absolute of empathy, and it is the experience of God, according to this Jewish theologian. Well, I am not religious. The sum of what all my teachers, colleagues, and students have left with me as I part with this profession is an expanded soul, a state of grace, and my can of spinach. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll spend a little time, sharing some community again. And I would just like to add that all the adjuncts, especially those who are here for a long time, You know, I look at people like Ellen, you know, who's been here like forever as an adjunct, you know, and Libby, who's also been here forever. They carry a lot of institutional memory. This is their career, you know, and, you know, I, as I said, this was my therapy. When I quit last year, I got depressed. And I thought, like, what's going on here? It's because I devote a good part of my life to this, and then I'm gone. And it's like, you know, I knew I need some ritual for this transition. And I think I think we maybe need to step up and give an opportunity for other people to be able to do this. You know, however it works. You know, but I really appreciate all of you coming here to let me do this and to let me, you know, how is it that every child needs to be accepted for the spontaneous expression of his personality. So thank you for letting me say that all. What are you on?
Please enjoy. We have
Something to say?
refreshments here. And
I want to say a little bit about adjuncts.
Yeah.
Okay. And as Phil knows, for many years I supervised the adjuncts in the Department of English, and I used to get very upset at times at the way they were treated by the university. In just such a simple way as taking books out of the library on a semester when they weren't teaching. At that point, they weren't allowed to do that, you know, and I thought, why? You know, I don't get this. But distracted as we all are by the need to teach classes, grade papers, and, you know, deal with life, I never really pursued that. But you've made me realize today, Phil, many things, and one of them is how undervalued the adjuncts are. And I think probably not just in the English department, but in others as well. I hope, I mean, I retired 15 years ago, I beat you to the punch, but I'm hoping that in at least some departments in the university, and perhaps now in English, I don't really know, but there would be more opportunity to showcase who these adjuncts are, what their background is, what their talents are, what their experience is, what can they bring to our programs that is missing in some way. And boy, you did an incredible job today, and I thank you, and I'm sure we all thank you for the time and attention you put into preparing this, and I marvel at your delivery of it. I mean, just amazing. So hopefully you will remind some of us of the need to showcase the adjuncts, and to let them take books out of the library when they're not teaching. At least we can do that.
I think that's improved a little, but I'm not sure. Seems like yeah, go ahead. Hey, Arabella. This Arabella, by the way, is the person I've known longer than anybody else in this room. She and I were in college together and hung around. We had a lot of the same friends, and you know, back 65 or something like that. With each other.
Well, I graduated in the class of '67, so that gives you some idea.
Phi Beta Kappa.
Indeed. Anyway, just a very quick anecdote based on your catastrophic paper comment.
Yeah.
One of the original formulators of quantum physics, Niels Bohr, once wrote on a paper that he was handing back to somebody in his class, "This isn't right. It isn't even wrong." Imagine how that person felt.
Oh my.
Well, let's socialize with each other for a few minutes, and then we'll clean up. But by the way, just a little house cleaning. Please make sure that any trash or recycling goes in our bags, so we can haul it out of here. Whatever we bring in, we'll haul it out. It's like State Park, right? Thank you.
Carry on, carry on.